Hello everyone, thank you for joining us for our session, Infonomics, the new economics of information, with our special guest, Mr. Douglas Laney, Adjunct Clinical Assistant Professor of Accountancy at Gies College of Business, University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. My name is Alexander. I'm part of higher education here at Ivy Exec, and I'll be helping to moderate today's session. So before we begin, I have a few brief housekeeping items for our audience. First, all attendees are in listen-only mode. However, we encourage you to engage in the session by asking questions, which you can do using the question box in your GoToWebinar control panel. Please make sure to use this feature for all the questions you may have for the presenter, while we invite you to use the in-chat feature for sharing any thoughts you may have with the rest of the audience. We'll be also having a formal Q&A session at the end, so please feel free to send in your questions throughout the session. And additionally, we're recording today's session, so you can look forward to receiving a copy of recording via email in the coming days. And now, it is my great pleasure to introduce to you Kate Deering, Coordinator, Admissions and Recruiting for Gies Online Programs. Kate?
Thanks, Alexander. Hello, and welcome to our Ivy Exec webinar today. As Alexander said, my name is Kate Deering. I am a coordinator for recruitment and admissions here at Gies Online Programs. I look forward to spending this next hour or so with you and Adjunct Clinical Assistant Professor Laney. I did want to give you a brief overview of what Gies Business is all about real quick before we get started. We offer 3 online master's degree programs, the IMBA, the IMSA, and the IMSM, as well as 2 brand new graduate certificates in strategic leadership and management and accounting analytics. Gies graduate level programs are innovative, they're affordable, and they're designed to be specifically online to offer a real flexibility and access for full-time working professionals. Today, you will experience a webinar from one of our talented faculty members and be able to get just a little glimpse into what kind of content and research is happening within Gies. Our courses balance foundational material shared on the Coursera platform with an interactive high engagement component as well. That high engagement component includes a live class each week and many other facets to learning like group projects, office hours, networking, and just being part of a great university like Illinois. Since we don't have time today to chat too much about the programs, I'm going to share this QR code that you can see on this screen right now. If you'd like to speak with myself or an admissions counselor to discuss your goals or whether or not this program is right for you, I would love to connect. So just scan that QR code and it will link you to a short form to fill out. Now, I am super excited for our presentation today. In this session, Mr. Laney will share his insights from his best-selling book, Infonomics, about how organizations can actually treat information as an actual enterprise asset. He will discuss why information both is and isn't an asset and property, and what this means to organizations themselves and the investment community. Douglas Laney is an adjunct clinical assistant professor of accountancy at the University of Illinois, Gies College of Business. He teaches an MBA course, Infonomics, and he is also on the faculty at Carnegie Mellon University, where he teaches executive courses in data monetization and data and analytics maturity. And he is also co-chair of the annual MIT Chief Data Officer Symposium. Douglas Laney earned a BS in software engineering and business administration from the University of Illinois in 1986. He is also a data and analytics strategy innovation fellow at the digital services consultancy West Monroe, where he consults on business data and analytics leaders on realizing new value streams from their data assets. He actually originated the field of Infonomics and authored the best-selling book, Infonomics, How to Monetize, Manage, and Measure Information as an Asset for Competitive Advantage. And his new book, which I love the title, by the way, Data Juice, 101 Real-World Stories of Organizations Squeezing Value from Data. It has just been published. Previously, he was a distinguished analyst with Gartner's Chief Data Officer Research and Advisory Group, and is a 3-time Gartner Annual Thought Leadership Award recipient. He also writes for Forbes and other business and technology journals. I'm super excited to turn this presentation over to Douglas Laney.
Thank you, Kate. Really appreciate it, Alexander, as well. funny story about the University of Illinois. So the degree that I got actually wasn't offered at the time, and I was originally a math and computer science major, but then realized I was more interested in the business aspects of computing. And at the time, there was no MIS degree, and so I decided to create one, which I called Software Engineering and Business Administration, and submitted it through the Independent Plans of Study program. And the committee, upon reviewing my curriculum, which was pretty advanced, unanimously rejected it, suggesting why would anybody want to use computers for business? This was in 1984. So the university's really come a long way now. I think offering the world's only class that deals with data as an actual business asset. So great to be involved and give back to the university in that way. Anyway, the program, the curriculum actually was ultimately approved, and my advisor contacted me the year after I graduated to let me know that they had used my curriculum as a permanent MIS program going forward. So it's kind of a fun story.
Great story.
Yeah.
All right, have a good presentation.
So today I'm going to give you some highlights from the course that I teach, and talk a little bit about this crazy concept of data as an actual asset, and why it's somewhat problematic, but I think opportunistic as well for organizations. So a little bit about me. In addition to teaching, I'm more full-time. I am an innovation fellow with the consultancy West Monroe, which is formed by a number of University of Illinois alumnus, and it's a consultancy that specializes in digital services, based here in Chicago. About 2,500 or so consultants around the U.S. And so, in my role as an innovation fellow, I'm expected to develop new and innovative offerings, particularly those related to data and analytics strategy. And so that's a little bit about me and the firm that I'm with. Kate mentioned the books. They're both available. Infonomics, which I wrote while I was at Gartner, and the more recent one, Data Juice, which was just published. Some nice things that some people have said about it already. And the fun thing about Data Juice is that it's a compendium of 101 stories of how organizations are using data or squeezing value from data. And each of the stories is tagged, so you can kind of search them for the type of data or analytics or industry that you might be interested in. And then each story is also accompanied by an analysis from one of dozens of industry experts, thought leaders, practitioners, even academics throughout the world. So each one gives kind of the unique perspective on the story, and what jumped out at them as being unique and interesting, and perhaps what they would advise this company to do going forward with taking that idea to kind of the next level. So whereas Infonomics is more of a business book, and we also use it as a textbook in the university, Data Juice is really more of a reference book. So all right, so let's get back to the kind of the history. So folks like to know where did this concept of Infonomics come from? And unfortunately dates back to a really sad chapter in American and global history, and that is the 9/11 terror attacks. And at that time, as an analyst with Gartner, the IT research and advisory firm Gartner, some clients started contacting us, lamenting not only the tragic loss of life, but also the loss of their data and other property, of course. But so naturally, what they did was they submitted claims. These businesses in the Twin Towers ultimately submitted claims to their insurers for the value of the data they lost, and I actually helped some of them at the time quantify the value of data by applying valuation models to it. What happened was that the insurance companies roundly denied those claims, suggesting that data didn't constitute property and therefore shouldn't be included in those policies. Now, the insurance industry realized it was a bit exposed, particularly because there were some lawsuits around the issue, and the insurance companies, the insurance standards body updated the commercial general liability policy template to explicitly exclude electronic data from P&C policies. They did that a month after 9/11, clearly to kind of cover their own behinds. Now, as I mentioned, the courts are kind of confused on the matter, as to whether property law should apply to data or not. And then the accounting profession followed suit and said, well, listen, if the courts are confused and the insurance industry is not going to recognize data as property, then we're not going to recognize it as an asset. And even if you wanted to include the value of your company's data on your balance sheet, you now no longer can, according to GAAP and other AICPA and FASB regulations. So, so that's kind of where we are today. And then the U.S. government got involved, and they held a hearing on how to evolve a 1930s style accounting system into the 21st century. Now, why a 1930s style accounting system? Because that's when the asset classes were defined by the then nascent SEC coming out of the Great Depression. And so at the time, there was really no reason to think about data as a separate asset. All data was physical, right? It was in printed books, magazines, ledgers, and so forth. And so it was a physical asset. And so, as you can imagine, given that it was a U.S. Senate committee hearing, you can imagine what the outcome of that was. I won't say, but I'll leave it to you all to suggest in the chat what the outcome was, and you're probably correct. So here we are today. Data is not considered an asset or property by the keepers of the definition of what constitutes assets and property, and that I think has an effect on organizations. I have a this hypothesis that the reason that many organizations don't manage their data like an asset, and they have trouble managing it, getting the resources to do so, and that they don't really leverage data as fully as they can. I think it comes back to the fact that the keepers of these definitions of property and asset have really doubled down on their antiquated notions that data is neither. So anyway, fast forward to today, and it's hard to go a day or a week, without hearing somebody spout on about, pun intended, about data being the new oil. And while it certainly is reflective in the, let's say the S&P 500, the top companies that used to be oil companies, the top companies are now arguably data companies. And so, yes, data is a primary driver of the economy today, and certainly represented by some of the largest companies in the world. But I think it misses the point. When people say this, it misses the point that data has unique attributes that even oil doesn't have. And the companies that are thriving today aren't thriving just because they're data companies, but they're capitalizing on these unique economic qualities of data. Consider oil. When you consume a drop of oil, it dissipates. It turns into heat, energy, and pollutants. When you consume a drop of oil, you can only consume it one way at a time, and then no more. But when you consume a drop of oil, it doesn't create more oil. But data is very different. It has the what economists would call a non-rival risk, non-depleting, and progenitive asset. That is, it can be used multiple ways simultaneously. It can be used over and over again without depleting. And whenever we use data, we're typically in a position to capture more data about the business process or the activities where that data was deployed. So again, the companies that are winning today in the economy are the ones that are, whether consciously or not, are taking full advantage of those unique properties of data. And I would also argue that data is increasingly a new factor of production. We talk about land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship as being the four cornerstone components of production. But I think there's a good argument to be made that data is a fifth factor of production, very often substituting for those other factors as well. So then I asked the question, is data an asset? Does it even meet the criteria of an asset? So I cracked open my accounting books from university, and really, no matter what definition you look at, whether it's a dictionary definition or an accounting definition, data clearly meets the criteria of an asset. Data is can be owned and controlled. It can be exchangeable for cash. It can generate what accountants call probable future economic benefits. That's the definition of an asset. You might also toss in that it's separable from other assets. And so it's clear that data meets the criteria of an asset. It's just that, again, the accounting profession really hasn't come around to fully acknowledging that. So irrespective of what the accountants and the lawyers and the insurance companies say, I think it's really incumbent upon organizations to treat data as an asset. And what we found is that companies that are behaving in certain ways that are representative of their recognition of data as an asset are rewarded by the investment community. So those that have, excuse me, chief data officers, that have an executive responsible and accountable for data, those that have an enterprise data governance function to manage and control and ensure the compliance of data. And that those that have a data science organization that are trying to take full advantage of data, not just report on it. Companies that demonstrate those characteristics are rewarded by investors by 2 to 1. So these kinds of companies have a 2 to 1 market to book value ratio, or more specifically, what's called a Tobin's Q ratio, market to tangible asset replacement cost. And so what we find is that companies that are data companies have a 3x market to book value ratio. So there's something that investors, if not accountants, recognize about companies that operate in a more data savvy, data centric kind of way. So this leads us to the topic of Infonomics. So as you can imagine, I first started looking at data's value post 9/11, and then started thinking about assets in general. And if data is an asset, what do we do with and to other assets? Well, we measure their value, right? For various reasons. We generate value from them, so we try to monetize them or create economic value streams from them, and we try to manage them. We try to have some discipline around how we're handling those assets. And so this is kind of how it all fits together. Now, there's the old adage that you can't manage what you don't measure, and I think that holds for data as well. But I also think it's true that you can't monetize what you're not managing well. And so for many organizations, this becomes kind of a vicious cycle of not measuring and therefore not managing and therefore not monetizing their data as optimally as they could. And so the main idea behind Infonomics is, as we Cub fans used to say before Cubs won the World Series, is reverse the curse or flip the script. And that's really the core component of Infonomics, is to get organizations to feel compelled to measure their data, leading to improved management of their data, and then leading to improved ways to generate value from it. So there's one kind of takeaway from this. That's kind of it. All right, so let's go kind of in reverse. Let's start with the end in mind, which is, what do we want to do with data? How can we think about data as a real economic asset and drive value from it? So there's a lot of myths around data monetization, that data has to be sold, that you have to exchange it for cash, that only data is used has any value. These are all terrible myths that really hold back organizations mentally and culturally from doing more with their data. And as I'll show you, based on the ways that organizations are generating value from data, they circumvent and blow right through these myths. So even including the bottom one there, which is that due to privacy regulations, we can't monetize our customer data. Well, that just shows a lack of creativity, and I'll show you an example in a bit of how organizations do that. So what is data monetization? And if you're looking for kind of a definition of that, and my definition arguably is a bit liberal, it's really about the process of generating measurable value streams from available data assets. So a few things to unpack there. First, it's a process. So this is not a one-time thing. It's not a science experiment. Treat it as a process. I often talk about data products, right? So take a product management approach to this process. Then it's about measurable value streams. Yes, we're already using data in a lot of ways within an organization, but are we actually measuring data's contribution, its allocation to that benefit? Probably not. Most organizations are not doing that. In fact, I haven't even separated IT into separate INT value components. And then available data assets. So the third part there is, you kind of need to look beyond your own data for valuable data. There's a host of data out there, from social media to open data sources to data that you can exchange or get from partners or suppliers or customers. So you need to think kind of beyond your own four walls when it comes to available data assets that are monetizable. All right. So let's talk about the patterns. So one of the things that I've done, and kind of the background behind the book Data Juice, is that while I was at Gartner, they asked me to, I was kind of a big data analyst and focusing on big data. And the questions quickly turned from, what is big data, to how do we do big data, to what do we do with all this big data? And so I started collecting examples of how organizations are using data in innovative and high value ways. And a dozen examples turn into 50 examples, turn into, I have nearly 500, 600 examples in my library now. And when I've done a meta-analysis of them, they've kind of fallen into a couple of different patterns. Indirect data monetization are ways that organizations are using data internally to drive value, pretty much. And then direct data monetization are ways where you're externalizing data to drive new value streams. And so we can use data, of course, to improve processes. And again, we already do this, but many organizations are not capturing or measuring the value that's generated from that data as a component of the overall process. We can use data to reduce risk and compliance. We can use data to identify opportunities for new products or new markets or even new lines of business. We can digitalize products or services, automate them to some degree using data. Data is kind of a core component of digitalization. We can use it to improve our partnerships. And then a couple of new ones here that I didn't really write about in the book. Well, one of them here is Aesthetizing on the balance sheet. So remember I said data is not a balance sheet asset. However, accountants have come up with some clever ways to kind of get around this. And one is to create a subsidiary or a special purpose vehicle, move the data assets from the parent company into that special purpose vehicle, and then value that business on the balance sheet. So we've seen this done a few times, and we help organizations kind of work through this. Yes, it's arguably a bit of accounting shenanigans, but it's entirely legal and auditable. So, it's something we've seen airlines do, gaming companies, European football teams, and so forth. So it's something that can be done. Okay, and then we have direct data monetization, and this is, again, we're using data to actually generate some real tangible value stream by sharing your data externally. And you can do that by bartering or trading with data, or selling it or licensing it outright. And one of the reasons why I suggest or start with bartering or trading with data is, like I don't teach a tax course, so I'm not here to give tax advice, but my understanding is that if you're exchanging data in return for, say, a good or service or a favorable commercial term from one of your trading partners, arguably you don't pay tax on that. We call it a discount, right? So discounts typically are not taxable, and so a great example of this kind of method is you go into the grocery store, you scan your loyalty card, right, and you get a discount on your groceries. But we know what's really happening, which is we're exchanging information about us and our purchase for free food, right? And so it's a primary way that organizations are generating value from their data by making it available to their partners, their suppliers, their customers in exchange for something in return that may not be cash. Of course, we can license data ourselves. We can license it through data brokers or data marketplaces. We can generate, instead of just selling the data, we can generate insights or analyses or reports. We can enhance existing products or services with data. Think about any product or service that your organization offers today and how you can enhance, or maybe already have enhanced that product or service by incorporating data or analytics as part of that. And then remember I said that organizations are not being creative enough when it comes to monetizing their customer data. So one of the ways that we're working with organizations to do that is, so listen, because of various regulations like the California Consumer Privacy Act or GDPR or HIPAA, or name your privacy regulation, like I can't sell you my customer data, right? But I can sell your stuff to my customers, right, without ever exposing who they are, and take a cut of the action, a referral fee, or a commission. And in that way, I'm monetizing my customer data without ever exposing PII to anyone. So that's what we call inverted data monetization. And then we've also seen organizations, particularly the airlines in the early days of the pandemic, collateralize their data to take out loans. You would think, well, why didn't they collateralize their airplanes? Well, because most aircraft are leased, the gates are leased. So what do airlines actually own? Well, the only thing they really own is their customer data. And so interestingly, and I wrote about this in an article in Forbes, that the airlines, American Airlines, United Airlines in particular, got valuations for their customer loyalty programs, which are comprised mostly of data, to the tune of $20 and $30 billion each. which is interesting when you consider that the value of those businesses themselves at the time were only about 8 and 9 billion. So consider that the value of your organization's data might be greater than the value of the organization itself. So something to certainly think about. So as you can see, there are a variety of patterns and ways to monetize data, and don't get fixated on just one of them, because data is, again, a non-rival risk, non-depleting asset. You can line up all sorts of different ways to monetize data. All right. So sorry, was there a question? Okay. So let's talk about the process. So I talk about there being a process to this, and so I've kind of broken this into 3 phases, and the approach that we take at West Monroe, and that I wrote a bit about in the book, which is starting with this first phase of generating ideas for innovating with data. So we run workshops. I teach this in the class, how to go about this process of ideation, and I'll show you some of the kind of the tools and tricks that we use. And then we go into a process of assessing the feasibility and prioritizing the ideas, refining them a bit. And then in the second phase, we'll go into maybe a deeper analysis of the markets, of the buyers, their wants and needs, start thinking about how we might actually package the data, because we can productize and package data in a variety of different ways, and start specifying the requirements, the technical requirements, the support requirements, the data requirements, and so forth. And then the third phase is really more about architecting the solution and building out those data products, implementing them, and then supporting them as well, and selling them if they're externally available as well. So that's really the main approach, the overall approach to data monetization that we teach. And that we apply at West Monroe. Now, I talked about the ideation process. So the workshops that we run, there are a few kind of exercises and topics that we go through to fully explore all of the potential ideas for monetizing any given data asset. First is we want to understand the drivers of the organization itself. What are the different forms of the different kind of value considerations? Like, are you an organization that's focused on consumer experience or growth or revenue or any of these other dimensions or cost savings? And so there definitely are some cardinal directions there you can see, but also some kind of subordinate directions that are kind of related to the others. We also want to make sure that the folks in the room understand what I just talked about, the different patterns of data monetization. Then on the right, we want to explore the variety of data assets. Remember, I mentioned that we want to explore not just your own data, but also what third-party data, alternative data, external data, whatever you want to call it, could be potentially integrated with your own data, or maybe even monetized independently in some way. And we've seen companies form from scratch, just monetizing data that's available out there on the interwebs. Then we want to look at buyers and users of data, not just inside the organization, but outside. We want to consider your partners, your suppliers, your customers, your partners' partners, your suppliers' partners, your partners' suppliers, and customers' suppliers, and so forth. Because we might find that this extended business ecosystem, there are some parties that would find value in the data or analysis that you're able to provide, particularly if you have really good insights on a slice of the market. So right now we're working with, say, with an e-commerce company that has thousands of reviews on thousands of products that they offer in a particular segment of the market. And by analyzing that data and doing text mining and doing some analysis well beyond just sentiment analysis, we're able to create data products that are attractive to particular buyers throughout their extended business ecosystem. Then we want to run through some hypotheses, and the main thing we do with these hypotheses is we look at not just hindsight-oriented analytics. A lot of companies are building pretty pie charts and bouncy bar charts and dashing dashboards, right? And it just doesn't move the needle on the business too much. But when you get into the realm of doing, and I'll show you on the next slide, more advanced analytics, that's where the real value happens. And then we will also want to explore the ways that the data can be packaged. And as part of the exercise, we'll also pull in some examples from other industries and talk about how they might be leveraged those ideas might be adaptable. So I mentioned the analysis, and so what we want to kind of stay away from is the descriptive analytics. We want to get more into how can we use data to diagnose something, or predict something, or prescribe something, or automate something, and that's where the real value happens. The further along this curve you move, the higher the value. Of course, the greater the challenges in producing that data product, and perhaps more limited the market. But that's where the real value happens for most organizations. And so when we're doing this hypothesis generating, we're kind of breaking up the organization into various functions, or the data into various subgroups, and looking at how we can use this data or provide some kind of diagnostic or predictive insights or analysis to that portion of the business. So let me share with you, I mentioned we share examples as part of this process as well. So I'll share with you a few examples. I probably won't get into all of these, but one cool example is Walmart Labs. Walmart years ago identified that they have a great search engine online and it helps people find what they're looking for, but very often it leads to people finding what they're looking for, that it takes into account tens of millions per month and matches that to product descriptions. And but what they found is that 1 week people were searching for entering a particular search term that was resulting in a high degree of shopping cart abandonment, and that search term was the word house. And what people were looking for was not doll houses or dog houses or housing goods, as the search engine inferred, but so it was taking them to these things and was resulting in just this large, high degree of shopping cart abandonment. What people were actually looking for, as you might have guessed, was the box DVD set, or the ability to stream the medical drama House, if you remember that show. And so what Walmart realized was that their search engine wasn't taking what into account? Well, it wasn't taking trends into account. It was staring at its own navel, right? And not being aware of what was happening in the world at the time. And when they upgraded the search engine to incorporate what was trending on social media, they were able to reduce shopping cart abandonment across the board by 10 to 15%, which in Walmart terms is like, I don't know, $1 billion a year of additional sales. So real advantage there, taking it of leveraging external data. Infinity Insurance, small insurance company, realized they were sitting on a gold mine of adjuster reports. Somebody submits a claim, the adjuster investigates the claim, the adjuster writes a report that's used to process the claim, and then never used again. So that's what we call dark data that's used for a single purpose and then kind of forgotten about. And so what they realized is they could text mine these adjuster reports for the kinds of language that are used that are indicative of fraud. And in doing so, they were able to identify hundreds or thousands of previously paid out fraudulent claims and subrogate millions of dollars of paid out claims that were previously determined to be fraudulent. And then they baked this into their claims processing system. So I mentioned dark data. Now, Lockheed Martin heard me talk about dark data at an event once. And they kind of took this idea, which is to, so they run projects. And so the conversation that I had that they heard me talk about, which was, I was talking about dark data, unused and unutilized data, and somebody raised their hand and he said, well, what dark data do we have? And I said, well, you're probably, you're a consulting firm. And I said, you're probably sitting on, years of archived emails and other project documentation that if you mined them, you could understand indicators of project issues like scope or budget or personnel or technology related issues, and then use those on current projects to get early warning signs. And so Lockheed Martin went and took this idea, and they claim they now have 3 times greater foresight and are saving hundreds of millions of dollars a year on cost overruns by getting these leading indicators of project issues rather than using the old status reporting and escalation method. Dollar General is an example of a company that is monetizing their data directly to their suppliers. So they make their data, their inventory, their shopping basket data, their pricing and all that available to their CPG suppliers, and have a self-funding data warehouse or data lake. And so I think that's something aspirational for any company, to make your data lake, your data warehouse pay for itself. Allstate came to me a few years ago and said, hey, listen, the automobile companies want to purchase our automobile data, but they want to get access to it so they can build better and safer cars. Well, this would be a win-win-win for everybody, for consumers, for Allstate, and for the automakers. But Allstate said, sorry, we're the good hands company. We can't be seen as selling our customer data to anyone else, even if we anonymize it, aggregate it, de-identify it, redact it, encrypt it, whatever. And so I said to them, I said, this is not a technology issue or really a data issue. It's a brand issue, right? And so they said, yeah. So well, why not take it off brand? I mean, it's a great idea. No one's going to fault you for it, but take it off brand. And so that's what they did. They formed a company called Arity, A-R-I-T-Y, and it's now a platform for Allstate and other insurers to monetize their data. Minute Maid gets a call from Chick-fil-A, and Chick-fil-A says, hey, the quality of the orange juice is great, but it's inconsistent year over year and region by region and season by season and region by region, and we need it to be consistent all the time everywhere. We understand that there are vagaries in the orange supply depending on seasonality and whatnot and supply chain. And so the flavorologist at Coca-Cola, who owns Minute Maid, identified 600 flavor components that go into an orange. They created this, they gathered crop yields and cost pressures and all this data to identify how to blend orange juice consistently year over year or season by season. And so, I remind people the next time you're drinking a glass of orange juice, you're drinking an algorithm. Anyway, I'm going to move on because I've got some other topics to cover. I mentioned the range of product types. So think about the different ways you can package data, from raw data all the way up through integrated custom solutions and analytics. I mentioned the feasibility assessment that we do. We look at a variety of feasibility factors in assessing each idea, and then what we do is we plot them to identify those that are our highest priority and those that we might want to defer or build some capabilities to support. And so that's what we do. And then it's also good to think about the roadblocks to data monetization and how we can, kind of overcome them. Many organizations will say, listen, it's not our core competency. We don't have the capabilities. And so those are things to kind of work through and maybe work with a partner to overcome. So let's get into quickly managing data as an asset. So, I often hear companies talk about data being one of our most critical corporate assets. And, it's a lot of lip service. And one of the things I do is review and help companies create their data strategies. So a few years ago, I'm reviewing a data strategy for a utility company, and it has this kind of language in their document. And then I'm reading through the document, and I say, well, how come there's nothing in here about inventorying your data? Like, if data is an asset, wouldn't job one be to know what you have, right, and create an inventory of it, so that you could begin to start thinking about how to manage it better? And they said, well, yeah, we're a utility company, so we inventory our trucks and our generators and our transformers. And I said, well, great. Why not apply that same kind of approach to your data? I mean, imagine a retailer with no inventory of what's on the store shelves, or a CFO with no chart of accounts, or an HR executive with no company directory. Those would be dismissible offenses for those executives. So they're like, well, yeah, maybe we should. Anyway, after the meeting, I go into the excuse me for this. I go into the men's room, and I see that they've inventory tagged their urinals and toilets and sinks, which indicates to me that maybe they find their toilets more valuable than their data. So I, of course, pointed this out to them. But I think this is kind of something that's endemic to a lot of businesses, that they're inventorying things that are kind of traditional assets, as it were. Let's get off this page. And so, all right, so where do we go for inspiration on how to manage data as an asset? Well, there are a variety of asset management principles and practices out there, and I've written about this in the Infonomics book on how to apply concepts from different kinds of asset management. If you're a physical asset company like a retailer or a manufacturer, why not apply those same kind of principles to the way that you're managing data? If you're a financial services firm, why not apply financial asset management concepts to the way you're managing data? If you're a services firm, why not apply human capital management concepts to the way that you're managing data? Not only are you then using concepts that are familiar to the rest of the business, but you're able to speak about data management in terminology that the rest of the business understands. and can appreciate. And that really helps with the concept of data literacy, getting IT and data and business people kind of all on the same page. So one of the things I did from this was, as I looked through all of these asset management principles and practices, I said, well, let's remember GAAP from accounting, right? So why don't we come up with a set of generally accepted information principles on kind of a baseline set of ideas on how any organization can and should manage data as an asset, including assumptions, constraints, and tenets, just like in GAAP. So some of them, I won't go through them all, but like the ownership principle. Like I think data ownership is the worst idea we've ever come up with as data professionals. Data should be owned by the organization, not by any individual or department. We're often ascribing owners to that. And so I started looking at other asset management concepts and came across the concept of a trustee or a fiduciary. So I said, well, those are concepts that where somebody is legally and ethically bound for the well-being and safekeeping of an asset, but they don't own it outright. And so I think that's a better way to talk about data rights and responsibilities than actual ownership, because ownership carries a lot of baggage. When you assign somebody ownership of data, then that leads to data hoarding, and it leads to data silos and all sorts of bad things. So anyway, all sorts of other kind of things that I recommend here. The replicability principle states that every time we move or copy data, we're increasing our risk, we're increasing our cost, we're increasing the possibility that data isn't synchronized. So we need to be more economically circumspect every time we're moving or copying data. We can also think about data in terms of sustainability, right? Apply the sustainability concepts to data. Again, I won't get into details on this, they're in the book, but it's another way to think about managing data as an actual asset and doing so in a more economically astute way. And then thinking about maturity, we've developed a maturity model that considers over 200 kind of best practice indicators. And it's not all about technology, but we're looking at things like culture and strategy and of how you're measuring things and how the organization is defined in the operating model, how data is actually being used and architected and governed. So it's a way for organizations to kind of baseline where they are and plan for their future maturation. So let's finish up with talking about data as an asset, and just kind of very quickly, there's a variety of reasons why we would want to measure data as an asset. Well, because it's a primary driver of value. You can't manage what you don't measure. If you're kind of thinking about budgeting and resourcing for data management or any other kinds of projects, then it's important to really understand data's value. So how can we think about value? Well, we can think about value in a couple of ways, more foundationally and then also financially. So I've developed and adapted models for how to quantify data's value. Foundationally, we can look at data's characteristics like its accuracy or completeness and timeliness to get a sense of its kind of intrinsic value, its potential future value. We can look at how relevant data is across a range of business processes to determine its business value. We can run experiments to determine how having or not having data contributes to business process performance. And then on the financial side, we can simply apply the way that accountants and valuation experts value any other kind of asset in terms of its cost basis. It's what does it cost us to generate or compile that data? What's its market value if we were to sell it or license it to others? Now, this gets interesting because, of course, when you license data, you can license it over and over again. Remember, it doesn't deplete, and it's non-rivalrous. So it's a bit of an optimization model that you have to kind of play with there. And then the economic value, which is its contribution to a revenue stream or expense savings. So there's a variety of ways we can kind of look at those valuations. And where things get really interesting is how organizations actually combine them. So, you know, in the upper left here, AIG showed us how they, oh, actually this is Boeing, showed us how they identify data to prioritize for data management by identifying data that has a low intrinsic value but a high business relevancy. AIG showed me how they were able to prove the value of governing data by connecting the intrinsic value of data to its performance. Like they can actually track how a 3% increase in data accuracy or a 1% increase in data completeness, how does that drive the performance of business processes where that data is used. A company called Vivint, a manufacturing company, identified that they had a lot of data that was underutilized, wasn't driving a lot of economic value, but had a lot of business potential. And so when they use that to identify data that they should use better throughout the organization, they ended up adding $300 million of market value on a $2 billion business. We're thinking about kind of generally about what data to monetize. You kind of want to monetize data here in the upper right, data that has low cost, high quality characteristics, and high business relevancy. We can expand the value of data by monetizing it externally. And then in the bottom right is an example that came from an energy company that showed us how they identified data that was costing them more than the economic value it was generating. And because they are in a regulated industry, they really weren't able to do more with the data than they were already. And so they were able to then make a defensible deletion or defensible disposal decision for that data. So listen, I just want to kind of wrap up with some recommendations. I'll share one thing kind of quickly here, which is, and this is something we talk about a lot in the class, and there's actually an assignment that I love giving the students, which is take any economic model and apply it to data, right? All economic models were defined with goods and services in mind, not data. And so apply things like supply and demand or pricing and elasticity or marginal utility. There's a lot that we can learn about managing data better or leveraging data better as an organization by applying economic concepts to it. And so anyway, just to wrap up, and then we'll take some questions. Kind of my overall recommendations are to monetize your data and other data that you can get access to in a variety of ways. Manage it with the same or similar discipline as the way that you manage your other assets. Apply the same kind of concepts and principles. And that a lot of this starts with measuring data. Measure, inventory what you have, and measure data's cost basis, its contribution to revenue, its net asset value, and then measure maybe some characteristics of data as well. Its quality characteristics, its business relevancy, and its impact on maybe non-financial drivers as well. And all this will lead to improved management of data and the ability to leverage it better. And then I think kind of the Infonomics 201 kind of concept is, think about data as a real economic asset, and think about other kinds of economic concepts and how they might lead to the improved ways of architecting and leveraging and managing data as an actual asset. So I'll wrap up there and take some questions. I see a few people on the line. So Kate, Alexander, back to you. I don't know if we have some questions.
Well, first of all, thanks so much, Professor Laney,
Sure.
for this very informative presentation. I must say I did really enjoy that drinking data comment for the oranges. Okay, so we did receive a couple of questions, and I just want to remind everybody you can always send some in. So let's start. First question that we have received says, what are the ethical considerations regarding data monetization?
Yeah, that's a great question, and something a lot of organizations are really concerned with. There are a number of stories about how organizations have shared data and exposed data, and things have gone sideways. One of the things that we like to do, and you saw maybe quickly in the feasibility assessment that we do for ideas, is we actually take time to actually look at the ethical considerations. How has this kind of data been used badly by others? What happens if it gets exposed? What happens if it gets misinterpreted or integrated with other data? So for example, we may not be sharing personally identifiable information, but there's data out there that could be integrated or matrixed, it's called, with our own data to re-identify individuals. We need to be very careful with that. So there are people who call themselves data or digital ethicists who can help you think through these challenges. But I would definitely suggest that anytime you're looking particularly at leveraging any kind of personally identifiable information, that you consider the ramifications of that and do so in a very formal way. This may involve kind of a red team, a blue team kind of approach. There's no real science to it right now. There are lists of the kinds of ethical issues that have arisen, and a lot of cautionary anecdotal tales that should be heeded, but there's no real science behind it just yet. I know there's some people working on this, like my former colleague at Gartner, Frank Boutendijk, and there are others, Courtney Abercrombie with AI Truth is looking at the ethical considerations of AI as well. So there are people out there who are looking into this. Good question. And I wish there was a formula for it.
Okay, thank you so much for that answer. So the next question says, what methods, techniques, and technology beyond Power BI can be suggested to optimize data visualization so that it is comprehensible to the and therefore able to be utilized by stakeholders?
Yeah, there's a great class at Illinois as part of this curriculum taught by, I think, Kevin Hartman. I think he's let me get this right, he's a Google engineer. And he goes into a whole class on visualization. I do a segment of visualization. And I'm not really here to talk about tools. There are plenty of tools out there to do various kinds of rudimentary and even real sophisticated visualization. You know, I would say, again, I'm going to caution visualization. It's very sexy, right? And you know, people love it, and it's the bright, shiny object. But more and more, organizations want to use data to diagnose, predict, or prescribe something. And if your visualization is not answering those kinds of questions, then perhaps you're kind of barking up the wrong tree. So be careful. Be careful with that. I'm not discounting the value of visualization. I'm just saying it has its place, and its place often isn't in predicting or prescribing or certainly not automating aspects of the business where the real value proposition is. So
okay, thank you. The next question says, is data normally minded and or presented without personal identifiable information? As we move on towards a more digitally connected world, how can we make sure that data is safeguarded in the digital space and not misused for ill intentions?
Yeah, so obviously there's physical security, there's cybersecurity, there's information security, there's training, there are contractual obligations for those who you give access to data. And all of those really combine to provide, you know, some type of, you know, buffer against data being misused. Many organizations will even keep their personally identifiable information on premises, and the rest of the data maybe in the cloud. I think cloud providers are increasingly being trusted with personally identifiable information as well. But it might not be a bad idea to separate your PII from the rest of the data in some physical way so that you can manage that separately, provide some linkages via keys. The other thing that organizations are doing is are creating synthetic data sets. So synthetic data sets are detailed data sets that look like the original data, but the actual data has been dithered a bit, transformed a little bit. And the data set retains its original statistical properties down to a detailed level, but actual names, birth dates, social security numbers, addresses have been, like I said, dithered a little bit to reflect, to eliminate the actual PII. So it allows you to do detailed statistical analysis, pattern matching, things like that, that provide insights and diagnostics and prescriptive insights and even prediction, but not at an individual level. Right? So that's called pseudonymization or creating synthetic data sets.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the next question says, how do you ensure the accuracy of AI algorithms given that there may be bias in the data sets?
Another great question, not exactly a science to that and not particularly my area of expertise. But yes, there's definitely bias in data sets, and you can run tests to identify that bias, right? And then try to eliminate. Now, a lot of people look at bias as something bad. Well, there's probably a reason for that bias, and that bias perhaps is related to optimizing outcomes, right? So even if a data set is biased, if you're still optimizing outcomes, maybe it's not that bad if it doesn't have ethical issues behind it. So, I think people get a little bit overexcited by bias sometimes, but certainly bias in an ethical context is problematic. But there's often a reason for bias in data sets. One of the stories that I talk about in my class, you may have heard about, is the aircraft during World War II, which the U.S. I think it was the Navy, analyzed the aircraft that were returning and where the bullet holes were on those aircraft, and then made the decision to up armor the aircraft where those aircraft were getting hit the most. Well, what they didn't realize, but there was a statistician, trying to remember his name real quickly, I can't remember offhand, who identified the bias in that data set. It's called survivorship bias. The only planes that they were analyzing were planes that had returned safely, right? The planes that were suffering catastrophic failure and crashing and not returning were the ones who were getting shot in other places rather than, so what they had actually analyzed was where the planes could get shot up and return rather than where the planes could, where they actually should be up armoring the aircraft. So yeah, there's all sorts of different kinds of bias. We talk about it, I don't know, 10 or 12 different kinds of biases in the class. And they're certainly reflected in data sets and in analyses. And so it's definitely good again to have a systemic approach to identifying what kind of bias is in the data set and how that manifests in terms of optimizing or sub-optimizing the AI algorithms. Okay.
Okay, thank you so much.
Great, I see Kevin Hartman's doing the next webinar, so you'll learn a lot about, probably more than you ever wanted to know about data visualization from him. He's brilliant.
All right. Okay, and we have just time for 2 more questions.
All right.
So first question is, on a monetization spectrum, which analytics mode, AI, ML, or perspective analytics, bring highest data-enabled re-rate of company valuation from your own purview?
What was the third one? I didn't quite, can you type that in the chat? I didn't quite hear that.
AI or ML or perspective analytics?
Prospective?
Perspective.
Perspective? I'm not sure what that is, but sorry. And ML is a type of AI, so I'm really not sure how to answer that question.
Prescriptive, sorry.
Prescriptive.
There was a misspell, yeah. Okay.
So AI and ML often used for automating solutions, right? But also for prescribing, and so they're not mutually exclusive. I guess that's what I'm kind of getting at. So ML is a type of AI, and AI and ML can be used for prescriptive analytics. So there's really no way to like say which one is better than another. And there are a variety of AI techniques, from neural networks to decision trees and all sorts of fancy ways. So you just kind of want to experiment and determine which ones will optimize the solution, do back testing, and then continually modify and make sure those algorithms are adaptive over time. So.
Okay, and our last question. Are social media platforms taking it too far with monetizing data via ads?
Well, that's up to you, the user of the platform. I would say that that's part of their business model, and anyone who doesn't recognize that you are the product, when you're using some social media platform, then you're really being kind of burying your head in the sand or being ignorant to the fact that the reason they exist is not necessarily for your benefit, but to collect data and make that available to others to, for various reasons, typically for retail reasons. So yeah, I mean, there are certainly circumstances where one might say they've gone too far, but very often that ethical question is very contextual. It depends on your culture, your background, your own preferences. So it's very, very personal. And this is why a lot of these social media companies allow you to kind of tune what they collect and how they use it. Maybe not to the extent that we would like. The other thing that I'll mention about all of this is there's always some kind of quid pro quo involved. in order to be effective. So you as the user or the producer of content, right, has to benefit in some way that's greater than or equal to the effort or the data that you're providing. And the social media platforms have made that very compelling, made that argument very, very compelling, very appealing to our psyche. So I would just argue that if you're thinking about using data in any way as an organization, ensure there's a quid pro quo that where those who are providing the data are going to benefit as much as those who are receiving the data. So that's kind of all I'll say on that topic.
Okay, well, thank you once again so much, Professor Laney, for this presentation. We truly appreciated the opportunity to have you present for the Ivy Exec audience. Thanks so much again. Thank you, Kate, as well. If you have any questions on Gies online programs, feel free to send us an email. And I would also like to thank you all for joining us today. As mentioned, we'll make sure to send a recording of this webinar in the coming days. And I would like to wish you all a great rest of the day. Stay safe.